So hi, I welcome everyone to the VA section webinar today. Our topic is Military Culture, a Cultural Melting Pot. It's presented by Dr. Joshua Breitstein and Ms. Candy Campbell of VA Puget Sound Healthcare System. I'm Tiffany Fennell, Chair of the VA section of Division 18. I'm also a psychologist at VA Puget Sound. And before we get started with our presentation, I'd like to take a brief moment to mention that Division 18 of the American Psychological Association, which our division is Psychologists in Public Service, is hosting this webinar. And to remind you that Division 18 is made up of psychologists who serve in many public health service settings, and we're represented by 6 sections of the division. That's the community and state hospitals, criminal justice, police and public safety, severe mental illness, Indian country, and veterans affairs. And I'd like to highlight that Division 18 is the only division in APA that has a dedicated section for psychologists who work in the VA. And so that's why it's considered the home division for VA psychologists. And there are many membership benefits and ways to get involved. So for more info, email us, find us on the web or social media. You can find direct links in the note pod here on the Adobe Connect webinar. And a little bit of housekeeping before we begin introductions. All questions can be entered into the chat box. The presenters will save time at the end of their presentation to respond to questions. Presenters have also made their slides available, and these can be downloaded from the Files pod. And following this webinar, you'll be asked to complete an online evaluation. The link is in the note pod. I'll also type it in the chat box towards the end of our webinar today, so you can just easily access it as we wrap up. And free CE is available to Division 18 members. For those members who are requesting CE, just be sure to complete the online evaluation and email me when you're done, and then I'll be following up with you with your certificate. I'll also send a follow-up email to those who registered, so you don't have to remember all of this information right now. So now for introductions. Dr. Joshua Breitstein is a clinical psychologist in the Primary Care Mental Health Integration Program at the American Lake Division of VA Puget Sound. He previously served as an active duty Army psychologist and primary care mental health consultant at Madigan Army Medical Center in Tacoma. Dr. Breitstein served in Iraq and is a combat veteran. Ms. Candy Campbell is a clinical social worker who is also in the primary care mental health integration program at American Lake. Prior to coming to VA Puget Sound, she served in the family advocacy program at Joint Base Lewis McChord in Tacoma, Washington. She also retired from active duty in the United States Army and is a combat veteran. So as you can see, our presenters today are informed by their own varying roles in the military, as Dr. Breitstein was an Army psychologist and Ms. Campbell was a quartermaster logistics officer. And it's also informed by research on military culture. So now I'll turn it over to our speakers.
Thank you very much. We appreciate the opportunity.
Good morning.
Good morning. All right. So, to prove that we really were in the military, this is us here. Candy is on the left in a C-130, probably entering Iraq, I would assume, or leaving.
Leaving. That's why the smile's on my face.
Okay, and I am entering Iraq, and I was with my mental health tech. I was actually in Kuwait, and I'm smiling because I have no idea what I'm about to get into. All right, so our goals for today is to help folks understand military culture, to foster rapport and enhance care, to understand the impact of military service on military members and their families, to help highlight the belief system of military members and now veterans, discuss transition challenges to civilian life, provide an idea of demographics of the military, at least specifically from the Army, to get a sense of what demographics look like between officers and enlisted personnel. Discuss the interaction with mental health in the military across various conflicts to provide information on how service members interact with mental health throughout various wars. Hopefully we'll get a chance to talk about types of discharges and then do's and don'ts when working with military veterans. It is a tall order. We're going to get through as much as we can. Feel free to ask questions at the end. We're going to save about 10 minutes at the end to answer questions. And then also feel free to email us after the presentation if you have additional questions. So some reasons for veterans joining the military, as you can see here, they're varied. They range from wanting to serve my country, to wanting to deploy, for educational benefits, to just look for a different change, looking for something different, break various cultural cycles. So the big thing to highlight here is that the reasons military members or service members join the military will also inform their experience. So for example, if a service member joins for educational benefits only, to go to college and had no expectation of deploying to a combat zone, and then they find themselves in a combat zone, that can really affect potentially their well-being and their attitude towards their service and after. So really, the specific reasons for joining will inform their experience and create expectations throughout their military experience. The other thing to highlight too is that the military is often seen as a transformative role for men. It's historically reviewed as a rite of passage, kind of a springboard into adulthood, where women are less likely and expected to serve. And these are beliefs that are ingrained often in military culture. So basic tenets of military culture. For those who don't know, the military emphasizes discipline, hierarchy, prioritizes group over the individual, and uses specific rituals and symbols to convey important meanings and transitions. Military law requires commanding officers and those in authority to demonstrate virtue, honor, patriotism, and subordination in all they do. Each branch has its own mission. For the purposes of today, we're not going to go into the various branches and their missions. Be happy to talk about that another time if there's an interest. But essentially the idea here is that military culture often strips people of their individual identities, and they become part of this group. And that's part of indoctrination into the military that starts in basic training.
So some of the uniqueness of military culture is that it's really unlike any other career, because the demands of military life really put pressure not on just the service member, but also their families. So if a service member's family gets in trouble, say they go steal from the post-exchange, then the service member's held accountable for that and is often told to get their family in line. With military, each service member has a military occupational specialty or area of concentration, and that deeply defines them, because really, if you talk about your MOS, it's who you are. If I'm an 11 Bravo infantry soldier, that's really who I am, and that's how I identify, and each MOS is like that. And it provides a sense of deep commitment to the unit and mission at any cost. If you really think about it, when a service member raises that right hand and swears in, they're willing to give up their life for that unit and mission. So that's a seriously deep commitment, and they really do instill that. And then, of course, the military culture rewards physical fitness and emotional stoicism. Anything else is really considered a weakness. And the maintenance of good order and discipline requires leadership to resolve any conflict, like I said before. If a service member's family steals, or they get in a fight with their spouse and there's some domestic violence allegations, that commander has an obligation to step in and protect the mission and unit integrity, and anything that doesn't look good on the unit is considered a negative thing, and it impacts the soldier.
And just to highlight here also, too, there's a saying that if the military wanted you to have a family, they would have issued you one. Mm-hmm. And part of that is, this can create a lot of issues with power and control, causing service members to have the perception that they need to control every aspect of their lives. And these things obviously can bleed into and continue well beyond service.
And so active duty required to be on duty at any moment's notice during a 24-hour day. I remember several times throughout my career where we were called in at 3 in the morning and you had 45 minutes to get in, regardless of what day of the week it was. You needed permission to do anything outside of normal duty hours. Some service members will want to work a part-time job or maybe fly down to California for a weekend. They can't do that unless somebody approves that. And then actions of the family reflect directly on the service member. So like Josh was saying, when I was a company commander, I had service members that would get in trouble for domestic violence, and at the time I didn't know all the resources and I wasn't so educated in domestic violence, and I would often tell the service member, hey, you better get your family in line. They're not going to reflect negatively upon the unit, and I wouldn't give them any resources to do that, and all that did was just create a more hostile environment for that service member and family. And then the military requires teaching of really black and white thinking. There's no room for gray area because that's to help the service member survive in combat, right? No questions. You either do this the right way or it's wrong, whereas when they're back in garrison or out of the military, they have problems identifying that gray area, and they really work in that black and white thinking.
Yeah, and the thing to think about as we're doing this presentation throughout is think about how do veterans present with some of these characteristics when they're your patients. A big thing that we see is a clinician may observe lack of motivation on behalf of the veteran, but veterans oftentimes, because of these changes in their belief systems, oftentimes it may not be that they're unmotivated. They're waiting for you to give them an order. In this case, an order of what type of therapy they're going to have. They may not have the ability to advocate for themselves as effectively, and that may be perceived as a motivation and can impact the therapy experience.
Yeah, and one of the big things is like with the military belief system, they really identify with uniformity. They want everyone to be the same. You're not able to be your own person. You don't want to stand out. You're expendable. These are a lot of things that when I see veterans here at American Lake and Puget Sound, I see a lot of veterans that don't really know who they are as a civilian or what their values are because they've been told to be the same as everybody else. So as an individual, they don't know what to do. They know how to work hard, but oftentimes they don't know how to transfer that into civilian life. Boredom is part of the military belief system because in the military, oftentimes you're told to hurry up and do something, and then you wait. Sometimes you wait for hours, being bored, waiting for that next order on what to do. You're not going to react without an order. I remember in my younger days when I was at Fort Bragg, we used to wait to do airborne operations, and we would sit in Green Ramp for 3, 4, 5, 6 hours being bored until someone told us, okay, stand up, get ready, move out. Every order we're waiting for. Teamwork is really a belief system. Everyone tries to work as a team. Takes orders, we talked about that. Strength over weakness. They really do value strength, and strength often comes across as aggression, anger, presenting as more aggressive. That's what's considered strength. Camaraderie, of course, is that mutual trust and friendship with your coworkers. Loneliness is a belief system because most veterans and service members know that they're going to be lonely at times. When you deploy for 6 months to 12 months to 15 months and you're away from your family, you may have your military friends there, but you still get lonely. There's often very lonely times. Trust, you have to be able to trust your peers, your coworkers. Of course, orderliness, everything has a place. And then all or nothing thinking. It's either always or never. A lot of that's still black and white thinking.
Absolutely, and the other thing to add to this slide as well is, again, you have to also remember these beliefs are informed in high-stress situations, in basic training, in combat environments, in high-stress garrison environments. So these beliefs are often singed in the service member's brain, so to speak, and they're very, very hard to shake.
One of the things I wanted to add too that we didn't list on here is military values, because each service has their own military values, and in the Army they gave us a little card that we wore right next to our dog tag, next to our heart, that told us what our values were. And then when we get out of the military, it's really hard to transfer some of those values or to really identify what are my true values. Are my values the military values, or do I have other values that are important to me?
Absolutely. And then also with losing that identity of the military, especially in my clinical work here, particularly those that have done very long careers and retired from the military, 20 plus years as a retirement, those individuals often struggle the most because often, they have this instant camaraderie, this instant family, and then that's all completely cut off, and now they're on their own. And again, there's not another order coming in telling them what to do. So they can feel very disillusioned and lost. So just to highlight, we're going to skip the next couple slides, but just to highlight just a couple examples of all or none thinking. So this is from the movie Jarhead, so I just want to read this. So, sir, I can handle your Marine Corps, sir. The drill instructor punched the recruit square on the forehead. He swayed, but his knees did not give. The recruit had made the mistake of using personal pronouns, which the recruit is not allowed to use when referring to the drill instructor or himself. The recruit is the recruit. The drill instructor is the drill instructor or sir. So you can see here from this quote that the sense of identity is personal, individual identity is completely lost, and that happens in basic training. And this is an example of a quote from basic training from this movie, is completely lost. The thing I think the challenge also to think about too is these thought processes, these behaviors, these identities are broken down in the beginning of basic training and carry throughout the military. They're not built back up again when they leave, and I think that's also a significant problem for some. All right, so let me skip this one. So teamwork and camaraderie. So this highlights the camaraderie piece. That choreography, you lay down fire when I run forward, and I cover you while you move your team up, is so powerful it can overcome enormous tactical deficits. The choreography always requires that each man make decisions based on what's best for him. Not what's best for him, but what's best for the group. So everything becomes group-based. Everything is done in selfless service beyond themselves. All right, let's see. So I'm just going to highlight this last one. This is from Band of Sisters, highlights a portrait of American women in combat in Iraq. This highlights the stoicism. Brown was shocked that Hampton would admit to being on the verge of tears because she was so tough. The admission made her seem weak and vulnerable. Brown didn't know of any pilots who would own up to the thinking about crying, never mind actually cry. Saying you almost cried was a funny thing to admit. Brown thought at the time, like so many other pilots, she trained herself to turn off her emotions. When you are in combat, if emotions get in the way, you cannot. There's concern about survival, and there's this numbing process that occurs, which can affect the quality of relationships, getting close to people, and can have profound psychological impact.
And I would say a lot of veterans carry that forward into their civilian life as well, because they often can't identify their own emotions. What they can identify with is being angry or aggressive, because that was accepted in the military, versus real feelings of sadness, happiness, fear, disappointment.
There is some level that aggression, reinforced that aggression helps you survive, and anything else is a detriment to survival. Now we contrast that with civilian life. So we look at, uniqueness, individuality, choice, relaxation, luxury, emotionality, open lines of communication. So if we don't highlight for these individuals when they leave the military that this is what civilian life is going to look like, and they're still entrenched in that belief system and those behaviors from the military, it's very hard for them to negotiate civilian life.
I would say, especially open lines of communication is really huge with veterans and family relationships, because often the veteran, they've been told what to do their whole career, and now they feel like they have to tell family members what to do, and that's the right way to communicate.
The other thing I do want to highlight here as well, I know sometimes when we do this we get feedback that we're talking about a lot of negative aspects. I want to also highlight the military is amazing for many people. It gives them opportunity beyond anything they would ever potentially have available to them, depending where they live and where they grew up. So there's a lot of really positive aspects of the military, but the things we highlight here are often the challenges that we see within our clinical work. Okay. All right, so challenges to transitioning to civilian life. Again, this is going to be varied. It's going to be varied based on were they drafted? Vietnam veteran that was drafted versus volunteered. That's going to affect what their experience was like. So all of these factors that may have occurred during their service or not have occurred could affect their transition as they're moving into civilian life.
And I would say from a female veteran perspective, if you look at the male-female veteran challenges to transitioning to civilian life, often you'll see stories of female veterans where people assume they're not a veteran. They're proud of their military service. Sometimes they want to talk about it, but they're never assumed to be a veteran. And especially if they have a partner and their partner is a male, often people will thank their partner or talk to their partner about their service, but never ask the female veteran. And it can be challenging for a lot of female veterans.
The other aspect also is what is how are the military members received coming home from war? I mean, obviously, we know Vietnam veterans were treated much differently than our current, veterans of Operation Iraqi Freedom and Afghanistan, and that's going to affect them as well. The other thing also that's very, very interesting, and we see this in current conflicts as well as previous, is if a person is for example, a Vietnam era veteran but didn't serve in combat, they may, and I've worked with patients like this, they may have the belief that they're truly not a veteran. A lot of times deploying and being in a combat zone is thought of as truly becoming a veteran and serving, and those that didn't have that opportunity oftentimes see themselves sometimes as not actually serving.
Yeah, and a lot of the research also shows with female veterans that many female veterans don't even realize that they have benefits at the VA. A lot of the OEF female veterans do, but any of the World War II Vietnam veterans, they're not even aware that they have services. So reaching out to them is really positive. So are all veteran experiences the same? No. I mean, regardless if you have the same MOS, remember the military occupational specialty, or you were in the same unit, your experience is not the same. So I'll highlight some of the positives and negatives of those experiences. So of course a positive experience would have supportive, fair leadership. A negative would have some toxic leadership. Some people experience both of those because, as you know, in the military, you move often, you change units. You may have some good leadership at one place, toxic leadership at another place. Pride in service. Veterans that have pride in their service, that's a positive, but not all veterans feel that pride. The camaraderie, the teamwork, awarded for achievements. Veterans are awarded for all kinds of things as long as you are that service member that is doing the right things, or sometimes falls into that kind of clique club in the military because you have those as well. You'll get awarded more than others. It's an experience unlike any other job. I mean, there's most other jobs, you don't leave your family for 6 to 12 months, you don't deploy, you're not able to jump out of an airplane. So those are experiences unlike any job. And then travel and deployments. Physical fitness would be considered a positive for some people because maybe they're already good at physical fitness or they enjoy it. Whereas others consider it a negative because they don't enjoy it, maybe they're not good at it. Or there's this constant conflict about the standards because there's different standards for males, females, and for age groups, and there's this constant fight. And then if you look at the negatives, a few of the ones that I'll highlight is anytime there's sexual harassment or sexual assault of a service member, the camaraderie, the trust, the teamwork all gets degraded, and the veteran doesn't feel like, or the service member doesn't feel like they belong. And those are a lot of the negative things that they bring to us when they come here into the VA. You want to add anything to those?
Yeah, I mean, the other thing also I would add, just to kind of highlight in terms of, when you're on active duty, you're on active duty 24 hours a day. You can be called in at a moment's notice. And especially in our current environment, you know, with technology, military members are getting alerted all the time, you know, throughout the night, all day, to report to various things, you know, show up to deploy in a couple hours notice on some occasions. That creates a significant hypervigilance whether you have PTSD or not. And if you're always waiting for the next thing, and you're always waiting for the next shoe to drop, that creates this sense of hypervigilance. So sometimes what you see that may be PTSD, and you're thinking, why do they look like this if they've never been in combat, they denied trauma? It could be part of that. When I was in Iraq, I was on duty 24 hours a day. I had a pager at my side, and I was called into the combat support hospital at a moment's notice, paging all night and all day, sleeping when I could. And I was the only psychologist in charge of providing mental health care with a team of 4 to over 4,000 Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marines. So thinking about that in terms of the level of complexity of things.
And if you think about how a lot of our veterans will come in and say they're constantly preparing for something bad to happen or just to be prepared, if you look down where it says family care plans and single parenting, veterans that have kids, they have to have somebody available to take care of their kids at any moment's notice, because they can be put out of the military for a family care plan if they don't have that. So say they get called at 3 in the morning to come in, they have to be able to contact someone on that family care plan to come take care of those kids or to send them to take care of the kids, which can often put them in this place of constantly being hyper vigilant and making sure they have planning for every kind of thing that comes up. Military sexual trauma is pretty big in the military. If you look at some of the percentages here, it's a wide array. It says approximately 9.5 to 33% of women veterans report attempted or completed rape during their military service, and approximately 22 to 84% of women report experiencing all forms of assault, rape, and harassment during their military service. If you look at the third bullet, it says reports of sexual assault in the military between 2007 and 2013 increased by 88%. That's kind of a misleading statement, even though it's in the research, because I worked with the Army's Sexual Harassment and Assault Response Program, and I know that the sexual assault policies weren't really enforced until 2006. So of course from 2007 to 2013 it looks like a huge increase, but it's been going on the whole time. It just wasn't enforced to report it. And then it says military women also report higher rates of childhood sexual trauma. And there's men that report sexual assault as well, but they're less likely to report. You see in 2016, 6,300 males reported sexual assault. Most males view the sexual assault as a hazing, and when I worked with a lot of males as a victim advocate for sexual assault, most of them were assaulted like by their platoon, by their squad as a hazing process as far as fitting in, and they were raped during that assault. And they didn't want to come forward because then they wouldn't fit into the team. They felt like they were being disloyal by reporting it, and so they had to suffer with all these experiences. And then women who experience MST are 4 to 9 times more likely to suffer from PTSD compared to those veterans with no MST. And the research shows that women who have experienced MST often also have chronic pain, pelvic pain, menstrual problems, a lot of different problems that come up that aren't always identified medically, but you can tell in the mental health. So pay attention to those when you're working with a male or a female.
The other thing to add here too is, you know, many of our veterans who have unfortunately been sexually assaulted also have experienced combat trauma. So they have complex traumas, potentially from their childhood histories, you know, between military sexual trauma and combat trauma, you know, highlighting these significant complexities sometimes of their, you know, post-traumatic stress presentation.
And a lot of military veterans, often when they come to us at the VA, this will be the first time they've ever reported military sexual trauma, because while they're in the military, they don't want to report that because they don't want to be seen as weak or that someone took advantage of them or having that impact their career in any negative way. And then intimate partner violence. 1 in 4 women in the U.S. experience IPV during their lifetime, whereas in the military, 1 in 3 women veterans experience IPV. A lot of that is because a lot of women veterans are actually married to other veterans, and the rates of IPV perpetration among military veterans on active duty are up 3 times higher than those found among civilian samples. However, I would also say this statement is also misleading because I worked with a domestic violence program in the military, and the thing is, in the community or civilian population, if someone comes like here to the VA and you know domestic violence going on in their home, we don't have any obligation to report that to anyone. Whereas in the military, if there's domestic violence going on in the home and another service member knows about it, they have an obligation to report. So there's more reporting and more reporting requirements with intimate partner violence. There's a big stigma with that as well. So a lot of female service members won't report IPV because they don't want to be viewed as the weaker sex or that someone's taking advantage of them or abusing them.
I think the other thing also to kind of highlight here is, I don't want to say as a blanket statement, but obviously, as you know, many of our service members, now veterans, come from very difficult family experiences and backgrounds. And unfortunately, a lot of these experiences get reinforced in the military, whether they were sexually assaulted or not. I mean, there's a lot of yelling that occurs, not just in basic training. Yelling is seen as a way to motivate and to get soldiers or service members to do things. And this just may reinforce childhood trauma that they've come into the military with.
And if you look at that last bullet, you see the research shows healthcare professionals, including therapists and psychiatrists, tend to view IPV as a social problem. They don't know which questions to ask, they don't know how to recognize IPV, and therefore the veteran isn't getting treated. I put some demographics in here just to give you a better picture of what your veterans that you work with, maybe what their experience was in the military. So if you look at this slide here, it shows the demographics of Army, Navy, Marine, and Air Force, and then the total DoD on the very right-hand side. And if you look at the top numbers, you see those are the female percentages in the enlisted side, the officer side, and then the total. So total military, there's about 15% as of 2015. It hasn't changed much from 2015 to now. About 15% female versus 84.5% males, total military. And then this next one really shows the race and ethnicity of active duty members. This is all active duty. So if you look in the green, you'll see that the majority of their race is white, with that number is, it's hard for me to see on there, 68.7%. And then you have African American at 17.3%. And then the next highest number is Asian at 4.2%. But you can look at those on your own. It just gives you a better perspective of what some of your service members or veterans may be talking to you about their experience.
I think the other thing also to kind of highlight here, and we don't have these slides, is, and part of our title is, the military is very much of a melting pot. It's a culture upon, overall reaching culture upon subcultures. And those subcultures are, racial and ethnically based. They're sexual identity based, and now, a lot more sexual orientation based. So it's culture upon subculture upon subculture. Multiple layers to the cultural aspects of military service.
And then here, this is just a depiction of the enlisted members. So remember, the enlisted are those non-commissioned officers, E1 through E9, and then officers are the commissioned officers. So this shows the enlisted side, where it has, the majority is white, 66.8%, and then the black or African American is 19.1%, and Asian is 4.1%. Those are just the 3 top ones. So if you think about how that looks when a minority goes into a meeting or a female goes into a meeting. I remember being in meetings with 12 to 15 other leaders, and I would be the only female, and I might see one or two other minorities in that meeting, but most everybody else was predominantly white. And then this is the officers. So you see, as we go up in rank, which the officers are mostly the leadership in the military, the white population really does increase. They got a 10% increase from enlisted to officer. And if you look at the African American population, there's almost a 10% decrease in the officer population versus the enlisted. The only other one here that increased was the other, and I think that just has to do with education and more officers realizing that, hey, I'm not going to identify with anything. And then here, this demographic really shows the ranks from E1 through E9. If you look on the left side, you'll see E1 through E9. That's the NCO or non-commissioned officer side. You see W1 to W5, and that's warrant officers, which the Air Force does not have. And then you see O1 to O10, which are officers. And if you look at the racial minority versus the non-minorities, all the way to the far left, the total DOD, you see that as they go up in rank, the non-minorities numbers increase, whereas the minorities tend to decrease as you go up in rank. So that just gives you an indicator, or something to think about what's going on in the military and what your service members may have experienced. Because there still is, even though it's a melting pot, and the military tends to think of itself as having more equal opportunity, there still is some racism, there still is segregation, there still are things that happen. Not in every unit, it all depends on the culture of that unit.
And that's another point too, is she's just saying the culture of that unit. Units themselves are going to have specific cultural characteristics depending on, if you're in an aviation unit, if you're in an infantry unit, if you're in more of a logistics and supply versus a medical. Again, another layer of subculture. So one thing I want to highlight again is just the exposure to mental health across the military. Again, I was an active duty Army psychologist. I served in Iraq in 2010. What I want to highlight here is as we go up in conflicts, engagement with mental health increases and becomes more normal, even though there still is a significant stigma. So, in World War II, there were psychiatrists. They did a lot of the initial entrance exams. There were some combat stress teams in World War II, but most individuals saw mental health professionals when they were off the line, so to speak, when they were not in combat, in more safer areas. World War II, we started seeing some more engagement with mental health. Obviously, as you all well probably know, as PTSD was not identified yet, but shell shock began, or the term shell shock began as early as World War I, and if we go even earlier than that, in the Civil War, they called it, I believe, soldier's heart. In Korea and Vietnam, division psychiatrists provide an opportunity for rest and relaxation. So here, we start seeing a little bit more of intervention, a little bit more of an understanding of the stress of combat as we move into more current conflicts. Now we look at the modern military, and so, like I said, I was an active duty psychologist. I was part of what we call a combat stress team, which is a 45-person team that's made up of mental health professionals and other, mechanics and other kinds of support personnel as well. We deployed to Iraq as a large team, and then we were dispersed all over Iraq in small teams of 4. And part of what we did, and what is different with our current conflicts, are we provided mental health support in the combat zone. So oftentimes I had to make difficult decisions of sending mental health techs out with infantry soldiers to provide mental health support on the ground during breaks of fire, so to speak. So mental health got much more forward, much more engaged to hopefully also break the stigma of seeing mental health professionals, particularly in combat environments. The other thing also is most large units, so a brigade is 5,000 soldiers, most large units nowadays will have a psychologist and a social worker and possibly a psychiatrist assigned to that brigade. So military mental health professionals can be part of combat stress teams, they can be part of hospital support, and they can be assigned to brigades. So there's much more, although stigma is significantly prevalent for some, and some more in other services. So for example, I think Marines tend to have higher stigma than Army, just from personal experience. Air Force, less stigma than that. So it depends on the service, what level of involvement with mental health you're going to have. But again, what I want to highlight here is just significant more involvement, more normalcy of engaging with mental health. The one challenge, though, and this is something to inform your clinical practice, is oftentimes treatment is a Bandaid approach. And the reason for that is because service members are always training. They're always preparing for deployment. So they can't complete full mental health treatment protocols, full therapies of prolonged exposure therapy. So one thing that I've noticed that's happened, especially now being on the veteran side, is service members, now veterans, have a perception sometimes that mental health help did not help them. And what they don't realize is they didn't have full treatment protocols. They didn't have the ability to engage in full treatment because it's almost virtually impossible unless they're getting medically discharged from the service and they have that ability in that time. So that also in itself may add another layer of stigma for those that have engaged with mental health through the DoD because of some of those challenges. So the other thing I want to highlight too is just mental health discharges to help you understand some things. So for those that are medically boarded from a mental health standpoint, these are going to be individuals that are their ability to serve is compromised by a major mental health condition, meaning PTSD, depression, bipolar disorder, psychosis. Those individuals, if those mental health conditions affect their ability to serve and fight and deploy, could be medically boarded for those kinds of conditions. We also have a number of other veterans that we now see at the VA that are administratively separated. So these individuals, for example, Chapter 13 is an administrative separation for unsatisfactory performance. These individuals were not able to perform their job to satisfactory, but it was determined that a mental health reason was not the cause of it. They may be administratively separated. So again, how is that going to affect someone's mental health when they leave? Depending on the type of discharge, whether it was administrative or a medical discharge, could inform their ability and impact their ability to transition to civilian life. Thankfully, we're starting to see other OTH veterans now at the VA, as many of you know, but just a couple years ago, those services were not available to those individuals. Okay. So I already just kind of talked about this slide, so I'm going to skip that. So the other thing also to understand is, again, and we talked about this a little bit in the beginning, but when you leave the military, it's going to inform and help you, when you reflect back on your service, how you left the military may negate a lot of positive experiences or enhance positive experiences, whether you're discharged honorably or under honorable conditions. Whether you retired and complete 20 years or you had a retirement or a medical retirement. All of these factors and how you left the military could greatly affect how you transition to civilian life and how you view your service.
And it could also make a difference whether you were active duty, reserve, Coast Guard, National Guard, depending on what benefits you get with any of those retirement or discharges.
Yeah. So due to time purposes, I'm not going to go through all of the nuances of what medical retirement is, what all of these separations are. We have it in here for you, what various types of administrative discharges are, so you can understand what they are. And start developing and generating ideas about some of your veteran patients that you see that may have some of these types of discharges and how it affects them. The one thing I want to throw out there really quick that maybe to help you understand is, so for a veteran to have a general under honorable discharge, it would mean that they didn't meet all the requirements for an honorable discharge, but at some point they served honorably, and likely there was some kind of infraction or a misconduct that dropped that discharge down. So a lot of times we see general under honorable conditions. That may be a reason why that happened.
Yeah, I just wanted to touch on the other than honorable real quick, because the other than honorable conditions here, you see at the bottom it says all these discharges, the individual will likely lose VA and educational benefits. However, the other than honorable are the ones that the VA just decided, last year, that we were going to start seeing based on their service connection. And a lot of people were afraid to see the other than honorable conditions because they viewed a lot of their patterns of violence, conviction in civilian court as really bad, but you can also get discharged other than honorable conditions for infidelity, for cheating on your spouse, for some things that you as civilians, we may not see as that bad to lose all your benefits.
Yeah, marital infidelity is a reportable UCMJ action under the Uniform Code of Military Justice. So a lot of things that wouldn't be considered offenses in the civilian world may affect the military service member's discharge, and you may be thinking, wow, that doesn't seem that significant, but it could be a factor of why they fall into one of these categories.
And then the do's and don'ts when working with veterans. So we listed some do's here. Take time to learn what the veteran did in service and how that impacts them today. Don't assume that every female veteran has the same experience, or every infantry soldier has the same experience, or every Army psychologist has the same experience. Every experience is different based on that service member, based on the culture of the unit, based on where they were at, their MOS. There's so many things that can impact that. Thank them for their service when the opportunity arises, but don't assume they all want to be thanked. A lot of veterans feel uncomfortable with this. They don't want to be thanked. They don't want to be, have special, looked at as special or different than another person. Listen non-judgmentally with empathetic stance and take time to get into their world. Really try to understand. It doesn't mean you're always going to understand what they go through, because some things it's really difficult unless you've experienced it, but be empathetic. And then ensure veterans and families are aware of all the resources available to them. A lot of our veterans don't know all the resources, neither do their families. And then help veterans learn to advocate for themselves from a strength perspective. Remember, they're used to only doing what they're told. They don't understand now that, oh, you have choices. So like when they come into treatment, they might ask you, well, what do you think I should do? Well, work with them on that. What do you want to do? What do you think's the next step? Don't just dictate to them, because it's not helping them get out of that just listening to orders.
There also is another aspect of that. I think they're going to see, and I kind of highlighted this a little bit before, but just to bring it to the forefront, they're going to see, for example, if you say, we're going to do prolonged exposure therapy, for example, they're going to see that on some level as an order. The doc knows all, they told me this, and they may not have the wherewithal to say, this isn't working for me, I want to switch treatments. They're used to gutting things out, so they're used to slogging through things without speaking up about it at all, and told not to speak up about it. So that's something to remember as well.
And then some don'ts there, right? Don't try to act like you know what they've been through when maybe you don't. Or don't provide your opinions of a particular war. Let them tell you their experience. And don't assume that veterans serving with the same time period had similar military experiences, because most of them didn't. And then don't assume veterans of the same gender had similar military experiences.
And I can give also an example. Candy and I talk all the time. I was in Iraq in 2010, 2011. She was in Iraq 2009, 2010. Completely different experience, versus 2003 versus 2005. So even though we were all in the same country, many of us, it doesn't mean that the experience at all was the same, even from year to year. Yeah. So I think at the end of the day, what we're trying to help you understand is your role as mental health professionals or within your medical practices is to hopefully help people foster what we call a bicultural identity. Help them learn and embrace the positive and negative aspects of their service, and also developing and tapping into the identity of who they were before. On some level, we often see service members almost like they're frozen in time, and we need to try to help foster those unique roles and help them understand their unique abilities that they had even before they ever entered the military.
Yeah, who do they want to be now? What are their own personal values, not the values that were dictated to them? What's important to them?
And now we just have some pictures of veterans from various conflicts, female and male, from World War II through Vietnam, and that is it. So we really appreciate it. We finished right on time. And if you have any questions, please feel free to type them in, and we're more than happy to answer.
Well,
Yeah,
Everyone's still there?
This is an amazing presentation.
Did we overwhelm you with the fire hose of information?
I hope you can hear me. But I just wanted to say thank you. This is a really in-depth kind of explanation or about all the, I guess, complexities or intricacies of all these cultures coming together. And now the title of the presentation, Cultural Melting Pot, really makes sense to me. I hadn't thought about the racial and the gender, but also the various, unit cultures. So see if other people have some questions to ask. But this is an amazing presentation. Thank you.
And we thank you for the opportunity. I mean, we love doing this. We've done this, starting to do more across the VA Puget Sound. More than happy to do it any other time. More than happy to do training specific to some of your clinics in the local area if you wanted that. We get asked for that now a lot. And we just, these experiences informed our lives, and were very formidable experiences sometimes in our lives, and inform our care of veterans, and we just like sharing the opportunity.
Yep. Yeah, thank you.
Looks like there's a question from one of the participants, Samantha, who asks, do you have a list of additional readings or references that could be provided? And voila.
Right there. Wham. Is that enough?
Thank you. And as a reminder, you can download these presentation slides from the files pod or box here at the webinar room.
No questions, huh? Well, if there's no questions.
It looks like there's a question about providing training to anywhere in the VA system.
Probably through this.
Yeah, through this kind of medium. I mean, I think that, if it's anywhere within the VA Puget Sound, absolutely. And we've traveled to Seattle, even though we're down here, and some other specific clinics, for example, like rehab care and physical therapy, and other kind of more specific clinics have asked for some of this, so we're more than happy to do that as well. But yes, through a webinar, more than happy, as long as we get supervisor approval and block our clinical schedules.
Yep.
Thank you. That's awesome. And also, as a reminder, this webinar today is being recorded and will be posted on our Division 18 Veterans Affairs webpage, and I will be emailing.
So then you can just post this on YouTube.
Find it there. Too, in the case that you want to access this or share this with other colleagues or your trainees, so they can watch later at their own convenience.
And please email us anytime. More than happy to answer questions if you're kind of marinating on things and some of this information and something pops in your head a week from now. Please reach out. More than happy to provide whatever we can.
Write your email addresses in the chat box for people. Okay.
Yeah, that's fine.
Sure. Or yeah, you can do that.
Should we do that? Yeah.
And so,
all right.
As we wrap up, I'll just kind of close with some, again, thanks to everybody for being here on the webinar today, and especially thanks to our speakers, Dr. Breitstein and Ms. Campbell. Thank you for sharing your experience, and also for the presentation. So again, there is an online survey. I'm going to go ahead and also copy the link to the survey that you can take through SurveyMonkey, evaluating this program today. And for people who are seeking continuing education credit, for Division 18 members, of course, one of the perks is a free continuing education credit hour. But you have to complete the online evaluation and then email me when you've completed that, so that way I know. And please do that within the week, so by next Thursday, December 13th. So that way I can get the information off to our CE chair, who will process, and then I can get the CE certificates sent out to you guys, hopefully within the next few weeks. And just also want to plug our monthly webinar for January 3rd. So Dr. Zachary Parrott, he's a suicide prevention coordinator at the Kansas City VA. He'll be highlighting some of the findings from the recent VA National Suicide Data Report. He'll provide an overview of the new suicide risk safety documentation requirements and the suicide safety plan. And he'll also talk about strategies for accessing and connecting with community partners to overcome barriers to veterans. So more information on this webinar and how to register will be sent out shortly. So stay tuned. And for any other follow-up questions, again, please feel free to email me. And I'll put the general VA section email address here too, so that way it'll make it easier for you if you want to reach out to me. All right. And if no other questions, we'll close.
All right. Have a great day. Take care.